The Lunsford family had always appeared to be the epitome of suburban tranquility. Living in a modest but welcoming home in Fayetteville, North Carolina, they were a family that seemed to embody the dream of normalcy, hard-working, close-knit, and involved in their community. However, beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect existence, a storm was brewing that would ultimately destroy everything they had built. The tragedy that would soon unfold would not only take the lives of two innocent people, but would shatter the very foundation of their community, leaving a scar that would be impossible to heal. In the spring of 2018, the Lunsford family consisted of three core members: Gregory Lunsford, a dedicated father, his wife Tanya, and their teenage daughter Riley. Gregory was known for his friendly demeanor and unwavering commitment to his family. Tanya, equally loving, was a woman whose warmth and kindness were felt by everyone who knew her. Riley, their only child, was a bright and energetic teenager who had her whole life ahead of her. The family, while not wealthy, had built a modest but comfortable life together. Their home was nestled in a quiet neighborhood, a place where neighbors greeted each other with smiles and waves, and children played outside until the streetlights flickered on. It was a picture of small-town America, a place where tragedy seemed like something that happened only in distant news stories. Fayetteville, a city with a population of just under 200,000, was known for its military ties due to the nearby Fort Bragg, and the Lunsfords were no strangers to the community's tight-knit nature. But beneath the facade of suburban bliss, there were signs that not all was well in the Lunsford household. To those who knew them best, the cracks in the family's foundation were becoming more and more apparent. Gregory, once a picture of a devoted father and husband, had begun to change. His behavior became erratic, his temper unpredictable. Tanya, though loving and supportive, found herself struggling to understand what was happening to her husband, the man she had married years earlier. Their daughter Riley was the first to feel the brunt of the tension. While she had always been a joyful and carefree teenager, she began to withdraw into herself. Friends noticed that she was quieter than usual, less engaged in the activities that once brought her joy. Teachers at her high school remarked on her sudden drop in performance, and she seemed distracted, her mind always elsewhere. It was as if the weight of the family's struggles was bearing down on her young shoulders, even though she could not yet understand the depth of the turmoil unfolding at home. In the months leading up to the murders, Gregory's struggles with mental health seemed to worsen. He had always been a man who kept his emotions guarded, but now the cracks in his stoic exterior were becoming impossible to ignore. Friends and family reported that his anger was more intense, his mood swings more violent. There were whispers about his use of alcohol to cope with the increasing pressure, and some suspected that he had begun to rely on substances to numb the pain of whatever was haunting him. Tanya, who had always been the emotional anchor of the family, found herself in an increasingly difficult position. She loved her husband, but the changes in him were becoming unrecognizable. At times, he would be loving and tender, but then, without warning, he would erupt into fits of rage. The tension in the home was palpable, and no one knew how long they could hold on before something would break. Riley, caught in the middle of her parents' unraveling relationship, had nowhere to turn. She felt abandoned by her father, who was no longer the man she had known, and terrified of what her mother might do. Tanya was doing her best to keep the family together, but the strain was evident. She had begun to confide in close friends about her fears, but no one could have predicted the horrific course of events that were soon to come. Despite these mounting struggles, the Lunsford family tried to maintain the appearance of normalcy for as long as they could. They attended community events, went to church on Sundays, and exchanged pleasantries with neighbors. But behind closed doors, the cracks deepened, and the emotional toll began to take its toll on each member of the family. Tanya's growing concern for her husband's mental health, Gregory's increasing isolation, and Riley's withdrawal from the world around her were all warning signs that something was terribly wrong. Yet no one saw the impending storm until it was too late. On a quiet evening in late May 2018, the Lunsford family's world was forever changed. A brutal act of violence would take the lives of two innocent people and send shockwaves through their community. But the most chilling part of the story was not just the murders themselves. It was the shocking truth that would come to light in the aftermath, a truth that no one could have possibly predicted. As the investigation into the brutal murders of Tanya and Riley Lunsford unfolded, the community of Fayetteville was forced to confront the darkest of secrets hidden within the walls of the seemingly perfect Lunsford household. The case would raise uncomfortable questions about the nature of family, the fragility of the human mind, and the terrifying consequences of untreated mental illness. The storm that had been building for months finally erupted, and there was no going back. The evening of May 30th, 2018, began like any other in the Lunsford home. But within hours, it would become a night of unspeakable horror. The family had endured months of growing tension, yet no one, not even those closest to the Lunsfords, could have foreseen the brutal turn that would unfold. The family members had no idea that this would be their final night together, and their lives would be tragically cut short by a violent and senseless act. That evening, Gregory Lunsford, already spiraling into a state of emotional chaos, reached a breaking point. The combination of his worsening mental health, frustration with his deteriorating marriage, and the overwhelming sense of powerlessness pushed him into a corner from which he could not escape. The once loving father and husband now found himself consumed by dark thoughts, his mind clouded with rage and confusion. The person he had once been seemed to have disappeared entirely, replaced by someone capable of unthinkable violence. Tanya and Riley, oblivious to the danger that loomed over them, carried on with their evening, perhaps trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy in the face of mounting uncertainty. Tanya, ever the nurturer, was likely focused on preparing dinner, trying to provide a moment of calm amid the storm that raged within her husband. Riley, too, was likely trying to find comfort in the familiar routines of family life, despite the growing tension she must have felt. What happened next was a scene that would haunt anyone who heard it, a nightmarish and tragic unfolding of events that no one could have predicted. At some point during the evening, Gregory's emotions reached a boiling point, and the situation turned violent. The details of the attack are chilling in their brutality, a horrifying reflection of the extent to which Gregory had been consumed by his inner demons. It is unclear exactly what transpired in those final moments, but the end result was unmistakable. Tanya and Riley Lunsford, two innocent lives, were left lifeless in their own home, victims of an unimaginable act of violence. The horrific details of their deaths would be revealed over the following days, leaving the community shaken to its core. How could this happen? How could a father, a husband, a man known to many as a decent and friendly person, commit such an atrocity? The crime scene itself was a chilling reflection of the violence that had unfolded. Neighbors who had never heard a sound of struggle or a cry for help were left stunned by the gruesome aftermath. Law enforcement responded swiftly, but by the time they arrived, the damage had already been done. The brutality of the attack left no room for doubt. This was not a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was the result of a twisted, tortured mind pushed too far. Investigators arrived at the scene to find the home in disarray. Tanya and Riley were found in separate rooms, their lives extinguished far too soon. The bloodshed was appalling, a grim testimony to the violence that had erupted in a home that had once been filled with love. The shock of the murders rippled throughout Fayetteville, leaving the community reeling. How could this happen in their quiet, peaceful town? How could someone they had all known and trusted be capable of such monstrous actions? Gregory was not at the scene when authorities arrived, and his disappearance immediately turned him into the primary suspect. It was clear that something had gone terribly wrong, and the police quickly began searching for him. As they scoured the area, their thoughts turned to his recent behavior, his increasingly erratic actions, the reports from friends and family about his struggles with mental illness, and his sudden withdrawal from social life. Could this be the explanation for the violence? Had Gregory Lunsford simply snapped under the weight of his inner turmoil? The investigation into the murders quickly revealed that Gregory had been planning this horrific act for some time. He had prepared, and he had made sure that there would be no turning back. The chilling reality of his actions only became clearer as the police uncovered evidence that pointed to Gregory's mental state and his growing sense of despair. The tragic truth was that Tanya and Riley had been caught in the crossfire of his personal destruction. They had become the targets of his violence, victims of a man who had lost control of himself and his emotions. As the hours turned into days, the investigation deepened, and authorities pieced together a clearer picture of what had transpired. Gregory's descent into madness had been gradual but unmistakable. He had become increasingly withdrawn, angry, and isolated, his once stable life unraveling at the seams. His family, especially Tanya and Riley, had borne the brunt of his emotional instability, and yet no one had been able to intervene before it was too late. The police eventually located Gregory, who had been on the run following the murders. His capture was swift, but the damage had already been done. The town of Fayetteville, the people who had known the Lunsfords, were left to grapple with the horrifying reality of what had occurred. The truth of the crime was hard to comprehend, and yet it was undeniable. Gregory Lunsford, once a loving husband and father, had taken the lives of his own family in a brutal and senseless act of violence. As the days passed and the investigation continued, it became clear that Gregory had not acted alone in the sense of physical help, yet in the deepest sense, his mind had led him to this moment. His deteriorating mental health, fueled by depression, anxiety, and untreated trauma, had created the perfect storm. He was not the first man to succumb to his inner demons, but his crime would serve as a harrowing reminder of the consequences of untreated mental illness and the devastating impact it could have on those closest to us. As the case continued to unfold, more questions arose. Why hadn't anyone noticed the severity of Gregory's decline? What could have been done to prevent this tragedy? The community of Fayetteville, still reeling from the shock, began to search for answers. But the most painful realization of all was this: no one could have predicted that the man they had once trusted, the man who had smiled and greeted them on the streets, could be capable of such horror. The aftermath of the Lunsford family murders rippled far beyond the confines of their quiet Fayetteville neighborhood. What had once been a peaceful town was now shaken to its core by a tragedy that was incomprehensible to those who knew the Lunsfords. The brutal deaths of Tanya and Riley Lunsford at the hands of Gregory, a man who had been trusted by so many, left the community struggling to come to terms with the loss. As the investigation progressed, more details emerged about Gregory Lunsford's psychological state. Friends, family, and even neighbors began to piece together the unsettling signs they had overlooked in the months leading up to the murders. It seemed as if Gregory had been slowly unraveling for quite some time, but the depth of his mental struggles had gone largely unaddressed, even by those closest to him. The police found that Gregory had been battling with severe depression, anger issues, and substance abuse. He had become increasingly isolated, withdrawing from friends and family who had once been his support system. Tanya had tried to help him, reaching out to mental health professionals and even discussing her concerns with close friends. But the emotional burden of living with a man in such a deteriorated state had taken its toll on her. Yet despite her best efforts, Tanya was not able to save her family from the inevitable. The domestic strife that had built up over the years, the volatility in Gregory's behavior, and his ongoing struggles with his inner demons culminated in a night that no one could have predicted. For Riley, the young girl caught in the middle of this unraveling chaos, the tragic loss of both her mother and her own sense of security was a blow that would forever scar her memory. Her friends and classmates were left grappling with the realization that a person they had known for years, someone they had seen smiling in the hallways and heard laughing with friends, was now gone. The reality of her death was a painful reminder of the fragility of life and the unforeseen dangers that can lie hidden within even the most seemingly benign families. In the days following the murders, the Lunsford community was flooded with grief and disbelief. People who had lived next door to Gregory, Tanya, and Riley for years were now left asking the painful question: how did we miss this? The signs had been there, but no one had put them together in time. It became a tragic reflection of the dark side of the human condition, the way mental illness can be hidden behind a facade of normalcy, and how it can destroy lives before anyone has a chance to intervene. Fayetteville residents rallied together to mourn the loss of Tanya and Riley, organizing memorials and vigils to honor their memory. The community came together in their shared grief, their unity a testament to the lasting impact the Lunsford family had made in their lives. Yet despite all of the outpourings of sympathy, the reality was that nothing could bring them back. and the damage caused by Gregory's actions could never be undone. As the investigation progressed, the authorities began to piece together Gregory's actions on the night of the murders. In his confession, he spoke of the emotional turmoil that had been weighing on him, the sense of hopelessness that had driven him to commit the unthinkable. He expressed remorse for his actions, but it was clear that the tragedy had been a culmination of years of unresolved issues, untreated mental illness, and an inability to cope with the pressures of life. Gregory's trial brought no sense of closure to the families and friends of the victims. They were left to wrestle with the question of why this had happened and whether there was anything they could have done to stop it. Despite the support from the community, there was an undeniable sense of helplessness, an overwhelming feeling that this tragedy could have been prevented if only someone had noticed the warning signs sooner. In the wake of the trial, as Gregory Lunsford was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the real question remained: how could such a thing happen? Could it have been avoided? The case served as a heartbreaking reminder of the often unseen dangers of mental illness and the catastrophic consequences of neglecting the warning signs. Tanya and Riley, two lives full of potential, had been lost in an instant, victims of a broken man who had failed to seek the help he so desperately needed. For the Lunsford family, there would be no second chances, no opportunity to heal the wounds that had been inflicted. Tanya and Riley's absence was felt by everyone who had known them, leaving a profound emptiness in their place. Their deaths, though tragic, sparked conversations about the need for better mental health awareness, better access to resources for families struggling with emotional distress, and the importance of intervening before it was too late. In Fayetteville, the memory of the Lunsford family would never fade. They had been more than just victims of a crime. They had been a reminder of the need to watch out for each other, to never ignore the signs of emotional pain, and to always ask for help when it's needed. Their story became a sobering lesson, one that lingered long after the headlines faded and the trial was over. The case of the Lunsford family murders will always serve as a chilling example of how the darkness within a family can often go unnoticed, until it erupts into a tragic and irreversible act. For the people of Fayetteville, and for those who have followed the case from afar, the memory of Tanya and Riley lives on, as does the painful reminder that mental health issues must never be ignored. For Gregory Lunsford, the consequences of his actions will be felt for the rest of his life. But for the Lunsford family, there is only loss, and a community left to pick up the pieces of what once seemed like